When you learn how to solo over chord changes, it brings a type of magic to your soloing that's very different than what you might already be used to, which is just kind of picking a one-size-fits-all scale and just wearing that out. But today we're going to talk about how to highlight the changes in a 12-bar blues progression, and this is going to be something that carries on beyond just the blues, because the principles that we learn today can really be applied to any style. Just be sure to stick around to the very end of the video because I got a free gift for you and your guitar that you're both gonna love. Okay, so let's talk about this concept of playing over chord changes. All it really means is you are highlighting specific notes over the chords that you hear in a backing chord progression, right? So if a chord progression is playing, like in the backing track that I played over in the beginning of the video, with all those changing chords, in order to actually participate in the concept of playing over chord changes, I essentially have to highlight those chords as they appear in the progression. So it comes down to timing as much as it is, what specific notes to play. But the best way to approach this concept, in my opinion, is just to take a simple chord progression and then just pair it with simple pathways as far as like picking what notes to highlight over the chord changes. So we're gonna take a look at a 12-bar blues in the key of A, which has 3 chords, an A chord, a D chord, and an E chord. So a 1 chord, a 4 chord, and a 5 chord, hence a 1-4-5 blues progression, which is just the tried and true formula for almost all blues music. So what we're dealing with is an A chord as our 1 chord, or an A7 chord, a D7 chord as our 4 chord, and an E7 chord as our 5 chord. So those are the 3 chords that we have to work with. Now, one thing that's important to note is that all 3 of these chords are smack dab in this region here on the fretboard. And what that should tell you is that if you're trying to highlight the notes in these chords, then that means the notes that you need, right, to highlight the chords would just be within that area, right? Because you only need this area to play the chords, If we were to just ignore the rest of the fretboard for a little bit, we can get everything that we need to do just right there between the 5th and 7th frets. So that really helps narrow it down. So now let's pinpoint the notes that we're looking for with each chord. Starting with that A7 chord, what I was doing in the beginning of the video was just taking a fragment of it and really just focusing on that for the most part. I was taking what's called a triad, which is a 3-note chord, and it's essentially the bare minimum amount of notes that make up a chord, right? 3 notes in order to make up a chord. So I took a triad of 3 notes for an A7, which is right here. It's just right there in the middle of that chord shape, which is if you were to bar the 5th fret on the D and the B strings, and then with your 2nd finger, play the 6th fret of the G string. That's our A7 triad. We have our flat 7 right here, our major 3rd, and our 5th. All the necessary components to imply an A7 chord. So this is just as much an A7 chord as this. This just has more, the full bar chord version, just has more of the same notes in there, so it sounds fuller and bigger. But as far as we're talking musically, that chord essentially fills out the space for an A7 chord. So check this out. This little triad here is smack dab in the middle of between the 5th and 7th frets, like I said, right? What's also in this neighborhood if we were to play over a blues in A, right? We have the A minor pentatonic, right? Even though it's minor pentatonic over an A major blues or an A7, you can absolutely use the minor pentatonic. That trail has been blazed decades upon decades ago, right? And that's part of the blues sound, is that sort of bending of the rules of music, to make that work. That minor tonality in the pentatonic scale works great over even an A7 chord, which denotes major and of course dominant with that 7th, right? So we can make all that work. With this here, we now have this right in the middle of the pentatonic scale. So in the beginning of the video when I was soloing, I was just kind of highlighting those notes and just playing little pentatonic, like simple ones, right? And because this is a slow blues, this gives us a lot of time to breathe and think about our next move. So it's a great place to start with a concept like this, so the track isn't moving so fast that you have no time to think. So when we're just playing this simple triad here, we can pair it with some pentatonic licks, whatever you got in your bag of tricks, no matter how simple or complex they are, they can work perfectly in tandem with that triad. But specifically when you hear that chord being played in the progression, okay? Remember I talked about timing being just as important as what notes you're playing. You have to time them correctly. Because if you're playing this over the wrong chord, you run the risk of sounding dissonant because each chord is going to contain different notes. Even though they're all in the same neighborhood, they still contain different fundamental notes. So that's that one chord, right? The 4 chord, D7, right, which we can just take a fragment of that. And by the way, I'm keeping all of the triads that we're going to be working on to get you introduced to this concept are all going to be on the D, G, and B strings. So that's it. That little region of the strings is all going to, you got to worry about, right? So the fragment here for the D7 chord looks like this. So it's 3rd finger on 7th fret of D, 1st finger on 5th fret of G, and then pinky is on the 7th fret of B. Which, if I were to make this the full bar chord version, all I got to do is this. This adds a couple notes, but still, these are the necessary components for a D7 chord. We have our 5th here, our root, or sorry, our flat 7 here, and our 3rd. Which you don't even need to know what any of those mean as far as the actual scale degrees. Just know that having those notes, the flat 7, the 5th, and the 3rd, are what make up an A7 chord, right? Or sorry, just a 7th chord, a dominant chord. So in this case of D7, we have the necessary components. Just like with A7, we had the necessary components. They were just in a different order. We had flat 7, 3rd, and then 5th. And in the case of the D7 chord, we have 5th, flat 7, 3rd. Different order, but same necessary components to make up the chord. And then with that, right, we can just continue playing A minor pentatonic licks. That can work, right? That totally works. It doesn't sound off or wrong, right? In this kind of context, it works. And then for the 5 chord, the E7 chord, we're going to take a fragment of that, which is this right here. 6th fret on the D string, 7th fret on the G string, and then 5th fret on the B string. So the notes, we have a 3rd, flat 7, right? And then we actually have a root here rather than a 5th, but that's totally fine. This still qualifies as a dominant chord, right? Even though we don't have the 5th, it still has that, like the necessary components really, truly, if we were to really narrow it down, are the 3rd and that 7th, the flat 7th there. So whether you have a root or a 5th next to it, it still would make this a 7th chord. Hey, by the way, if you're getting some value out of this lesson, be sure to hit that like button and consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. It really helps us out and it lets us know that you want to see more lessons just like this one. And believe me, we'd be more than happy to bring them to you. So thanks in advance and let's get back to it. But you don't necessarily need the theory in order to apply this, right? You just really need to memorize these 3 triads, right? A7, D7, E7. And notice how when I play them next to each other, they sound like different chords. They all kind of like take you somewhere musically, and then of course it sort of resolves right there on the 1 chord. But that flat 7 gives it some added tension, but it sounds nice and it works in a blues. So that's why we're focusing specifically on 12-bar blues for this. So when you have those 3 triads, you know, under your fingers, you really can just combine those with the minor pentatonic scale. Again, just to introduce yourself to the concept. Because I'm not going to give you a million notes, right, and say like, try this and work these out, because it's just going to be too much. It's going to be too overwhelming. To get a concept down like this, it's very cerebral, right? You have to think about what you're playing and you have to listen to what's being played, because in the chord progression, you have to time it right. You know, you don't want to be playing the A7 triad over the E7 chord because you run the risk of playing notes that clash too much, right? So you want to really focus on timing it right. So having the least amount of notes to worry about really helps. So you just have 3 notes at a time. And you don't even need to throw in the pentatonic scale just yet if you want to get used to this. To give you an example, I'm going to throw on the track and I'm just going to be highlighting just those triads. And by the way, you don't have to play them like, you know, in like full chord kind of form. You can individualize the notes, you know, or you could even just like select random notes, you know, in like a random order. There's all kinds of ways you can approach it. So you don't want to play these triads one way. Just know that these notes are like our little target points that you're going to focus on when you hear the chord in the progression being played. So I'm going to throw on the backing track again. And I'm going to show you how you can highlight the chords just with those triads. So in that example, I just focused on only highlighting the triads themselves, and of course adding little embellishments to kind of make it interesting, some bends, vibrato, changing up the order of the notes. But you could hear how with the movement of the chords, I was highlighting the chords as they were changing, and that's how I was able to maintain this like interesting and not sort of like single scale kind of approach to essentially soloing. Now imagine combining that with your favorite minor pentatonic licks. Now, I recommend you stay within this neighborhood as you get introduced to this concept and get familiar with it. Even if you can wail on A minor pentatonic way up here, I want you to focus on here because this is gonna, at least help you get used to the fact that you're moving with these chord changes, right? Because if you're just focusing on one scale over the whole chord progression, you're not thinking about really changing the notes. You're just using that same framework of notes within that one scale, and that way you don't have to think about the changes quite as much. But if you're gonna approach this concept, which again, opens up a whole new horizon of soloing opportunities and like melodic content you can come up with, it really takes a little bit more thought. So you just wanna think about and listen, really actively listen to the changing chords and just focus on those very simple triads in that very, very narrowed down spot on the fretboard. So one final time, I'm gonna demonstrate playing through these chord changes with these triads and doing them in tandem with the pentatonic licks to really drive the point home on how you can essentially pepper in those licks in between the triads and make for a pretty killer sounding solo. At this point, you can consider yourself introduced to the concept of playing over chord changes. But I want you to know that this is an ongoing process, right? Maybe you understand the concept, intellectually right now, but as far as putting it into practice, that is going to take some time. But that's why what I've given you to start with is something real simple, really narrowed down, really bare bones, but it's definitely going to get you used to the idea the more you practice it. So just be sure to take your time. And of course, use the backing track. The link's gonna be in the description. It's a nice slow blues. Give yourself plenty of time to think and plan your next move, and you can sit there and woodshed it until you get it down. So you now have your foot in the door on a concept that's going to revolutionize the way you solo over guitar. But like I said, this is just the beginning. There's all kinds of great pathways ahead of you as far as where you can go next on your guitar journey. Now, remember that free gift I was telling you about? Well, That just so happens to be the thing that's gonna get you there, especially when it comes to blues guitar. And I happen to have it for you right here. Haha. This is a free blues guitar solo heat map. This is gonna show you how to play blazing hot blues solos all across that dang fretboard. So be sure to click here to claim your copy or check the link in the description box. That free lesson is gonna take what you learned today and skyrocket it to the next level. So you don't even have to worry about where you go from here. I know exactly where you need to go, and all you gotta do is click that link.